Hello, all you book burners, and welcome to another episode of Books Are Burning. I'm Mark Will, author, songwriter, and publisher in permanent exile, currently based on the island of Taiwan. And who's this with me? He looks familiar from the Texting podcast. It is none other than my co-host.
Well, actually, Mark, you may be confusing me with someone else. My name is Jack Agnew, and I was decapitated in a factory accident in a place called Carstairs, which is in Canada, a small village. I was working at the Mr.
Oh,
Dowd's piano factory. So this is the ghost of
I'm
Jack
sorry.
Agnew.
I'm sorry. I thought you were Tomek of texting fame, but okay. It's the ghost of Jack Agnew. Jack Agnew being a character from an Alice Munro story, which we'll get to in a bit. Now, let me just set this up quickly. The tagline of Books Are Burning is book reviews, author interviews, and more. And I guess you could say this is an and more episode because we're actually doing a reader interview. Tomek is a writer and content creator as well, but today I'm going to interview him about what he read in the previous year. We're now in year 2025, the year of the snake, baby. But we want to find out what he read last year, 2024, the year of the dragon. Actually, the year of the snake doesn't begin until January 29th,
Oh,
officially.
okay.
But
Interesting.
yeah, Lunar New Year is January 29th. But since 2025 is the year of the snake, we can already start thinking in those serpentine terms, I guess. And yeah, yesterday I posted on Substack about this. It's called Wise as a Serpent, Innocent as a Dove, question mark. Those are the watchwords for 2025. We made it. We survived the tumultuous year of the dragon. I'm a bit surprised that we're still here, but
Looking forward to a
we
spicy
live to
2025.
we live to podcast again. All right, so yeah, I'm planning a kind of series of reader interviews. We'll see how this goes, but I'm inspired by the great Henry David. That is Henry David Thoreau, or Thoreau, as some people call him, but I don't. Chapter 3 of his Walden. I'm sure you've probably read that, or at least excerpts of that, right?
Yeah.
Chapter 3 is called Reading, and it's a beautiful, inspirational chapter on what he calls serious reading, like I guess you could say the art of reading. And I'm trying to bring that back, in this Twitter infested world that we live in, with live streams and podcasts and
Fuck live streams.
Substack posts and what?
Fuck live streams.
Yeah, exactly. Even though we're doing one here, so it's a bit contradictory. But I'm trying to bring back the art of reading single-handedly and with a few trusted associates. So reading is I would call it a spiritual exercise, but I just want to share this quote from chapter 3 of Walden called Reading. This is Thoreau and his concept of serious reading. He says, to read well, that is, to read true books in a true spirit, is a noble exercise, and one that will task the reader more than any exercise which the customs of the day esteem. It requires a training such as the athletes underwent, the steady intention almost of the whole life to this object. Books must be read as deliberately and reservedly as they were written. Any reaction to that?
Well, I can just share my personal relationship to reading. And I think one of the reasons I was hesitant to even join you today is I feel that for me, unless I'm reading a book for, let's say, for an episode of texting or for school, I often approach reading quite passively. Um, I remember how diligently you took notes, and I first noticed that in Korea, just the copious notes that you would take. And I think I even stole a couple of your styles of annotating at the time. But in general, I've kind of given up on doing much
You mean
annotation.
like books you borrowed from me? You borrowed
Probably,
from
and
me,
I
you
think,
saw how I underlined,
yeah, and I
and
think you even
I
described
see.
to me once some of the methodology that you used. So, I mean, I
Oh,
remember
you're
my high school English
frozen
teacher.
here. Can you still hear me?
I can hear you, yeah. Can you hear me?
No, you're. What did I say?
I can hear you fine, but my internet might be spotty from time to time.
Yeah, you dropped out for a second, but I hear you now. You're
Okay.
saying yeah.
No, I just remember like my favorite high school English teacher kind of giving us a very basic method of note taking. Like we draw a line down the center of a page. One side would be for kind of character names and I think important plot points, and then the other side would be something like personal reactions. But either way, my point is that I don't read that closely for when I'm reading for leisure. The only thing I will do,
Mm-hmm.
which is a slight idiosyncrasy, which may be interesting to you, uh, I have a lot of OCD present in my life in a multitude of capacities. And the one that I employ when reading is like, as often as possible, I do exactly what is going on in the text itself. So, for example, I remember all the way back when I was at university, like whenever there was a mention of a cigarette, I would go and smoke a cigarette. And now what I do is like anytime, for example, I'll have a cup of tea with me, and anytime a liquid is mentioned, whether it's beer, wine, water, I take one sip. So it's like I play lots of like little games, or anytime a food is mentioned, if we don't have it in the fridge, I will put that food name if I think it's reasonable. If it's like in any way tempting, I'll put that food name into my notes. And then next time I go shopping, like I'll buy that thing. And if I'm with Liliana and she sees me buying something kind of strange, she'll be like, "Oh, it's for the game, isn't it?" And I say, "Yeah, yeah." So it like ends up kind of dictating a lot of my grocery lists. Or even if it says something like the character takes a shower, then like I'll go take a shower. And it's like a really comforting game that I play with books. So that's
Is that to help you focus your attention, or are you trying to like get more into the text? Like maybe if you experience something that, say, a character in the novel you're reading experiences, it helps you like get inside the text more,
a little bit. It's that.
experience it more deeply.
It's a little bit that, but it's more just fun. It's like a fun
Mm-hmm.
game to see how it will affect my day and like allowing randomness to kind of dictate my day. You know, it's like it's the excitement of the jeopardy of what the text may bring. You know, so like, oh, the
Yeah.
text is gonna like the text made me brush my teeth right now, or the text made me go out and buy some ham. So it like makes life a little bit of an adventure, an unexpected adventure.
Mm-hmm.
So that's that's my idiosyncrasy when it comes to reading. But I like what Thoreau is saying, and I don't think it's overstating it to say that we are experiencing like a seismic shift in terms of society's attitude towards reading. Like I do think reading has dropped off and may continue to do so. It is sad. I mean, we see major universities right now completely dropping their humanities departments, of those notably being literature. I mean, that is just quite shocking, really, right? I mean, big time universities in England just dropping English literature as a field of study.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Well, I guess it's up to us then to keep the tradition alive. Um, I did have a question about the game playing aspect of it, though. I mean, is it still possible to play the game seriously if he's talking about serious reading? Is the gamesmanship aspect, does that like prevent you from uh playing the game in earnest games?
No, absolutely not. Um, yeah, I can still.
Yeah, of course not. Of course not.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
yeah. Well, also in chapter 3 of Walden, Thoreau makes a distinction between like the spoken word and the written word, and he obviously in that dichotomy he gives preference to the written word. He thinks it's superior, but that's interesting to think about in relation to like the popularity of audiobooks, right? Like if you listen to a book or watch a video of someone reading the book, as I did this year, we'll talk about that in a minute, but is that taking it as seriously as reading it yourself? I mean, I know that like reading books on the iPad, reading ebooks, that I try not to do that these days because I found that I just don't retain as much of the content as I do when I like read it on the page. I don't know why that is, but studies have been done which have shown that indeed that's the case for many people. And
Hmm.
I don't know. I don't listen to many audiobooks. So, I mean, I make audiobooks and sell audiobooks, but I don't really listen to them myself. So, I'm not sure how that affects retention and engagement and so on. But I'm old school with the, paperbacks or hardcovers and often a pen to mark those passages that I want to refer back to because I know I'm going to use it later for something. Either now that I'm podcasting, I might use it for that, or, could appear in the next book I write, or some aspect, some piece of it might influence whatever I'm writing.
Sure. I would just say that slightly, idealistic what Thoreau's saying, and that's not being condescending to him or necessarily to discount it, but there's so many factors that influence a reading session. Like what time of day is it? How hard has your day at work been? What's your mood at the time? So each reading session is influenced by external factors, and to be able to approach a text with that kind of monk-like discipline, concentration, focus is a luxury, I would say, for most working humans. So we kind of have to make do sometimes, and accept that the reading
Yeah,
experience is necessarily an imperfect one.
but maybe that's a good thing too. We appreciate it more because it's like a sacred um time that we need to carve out for ourselves. I mean, he talks about this too in that chapter, not to go on about it, but
It's fine.
he's been like busy setting up house, and like he talks about a volume of Homer that he had on his shelf or on a table or something, and he's saying, he's like lamenting that he hasn't had time for it because he's been so busy with practical matters. But he says in a way that helps him, you know, uh, get through his day, right? Like it helps him it gives him something to look forward to after he finishes those workaday activities.
Sure.
So,
He is living
yeah.
pre-internet, though.
What's that?
He is living pre-internet, and it's a significant
Oh, yeah. Oh,
distinction.
well, sure. I mean, yeah, that's another question. Has the internet and all our other distractions replaced reading, or is it doing so? Like, if it had been around in his day, would Thoreau have been like, watching YouTube?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, I think I'm not really ready to endorse this view, but reading is a different type of stimulation, and I would say it's less carnally satisfying oftentimes, right? It's a slower burn than
A slower burn. Yeah, there's not
than a
immediate
YouTube video, or,
gratification.
right? And sometimes we don't want that slow burn. Like, it's just not satisfying enough. I mean, that's just like the
That's a
same
good
as
point.
anything in life, right? Sometimes you're just gonna eat the unhealthy food, and you know it's unhealthy, but it doesn't matter. Like, and that's
Yes.
not even saying that the unhealthy food is bad, right? It's just like sometimes that's what it's all about. And like,
Yeah.
reading is struggling in that competitive market right now, that with the other types of stimulation that's on offer. It's a
So true. Yes. Yeah, and I don't know how I feel about that either. On the one hand, it's something to mourn, but on the other hand, it is what it is, as
it
they
is what it
say.
is. As
All
Mark
right,
Will
so
says.
let's
What song is that
yeah,
from?
it is what it is.
That's the track title
That's
too, right? It's a good one.
literally the name of the song. Oh, that's going in the show notes now.
Please, I need to listen,
It
re-listen to
is
that.
what it is. All right, so sorry that the font you sent me had to be changed, but that's Google Slides for
I'm
you.
used to
I
it.
think it
Yeah,
still looks okay. So let's get into what Tomek read in 2024. Here begins like the I don't know, the meat and
the Vanity
potatoes of the
Project.
program. The what?
The Vanity Project.
The Vanity Project. Well, they're all vanity, right? Vanity of vanities.
Yeah, yeah. That's what I said to your boy Craig, right? When you guys were potting about the, was it the Dark
Oh,
Side
about
Redux, or
the Dark Side of the Moon Redux. Yeah, every project is a vanity project to
yeah,
some
and you guys
degree.
didn't really deal with it as much as I wanted you to. I mean, I wanted you to be a bit more confrontational about it, but I think you wanted to
Well,
maintain
maybe we can
the
get
harmony.
into that in the follow up episode on the new Gilmore album, which you could also argue is a vanity project. But anyway, vain as it may be, we want to know what Tomek read in 2024. So I already knew some of this because we covered, several texts on
Right.
our podcast texting. Those of you that don't know, well, you should tune in because it's an amazing experience to
It
listen
is.
to us witter on about text. But yeah, together we read well, not always in their entirety. I didn't read all of the second book that appears in this slide, but let's just go down the list.
You
We
had
had
read it,
Oscar
though,
Wilde's.
apparently, many
Well,
years ago.
before, but I mean recently. So going
Sure.
down the list here, we began with De Profundis, from the depths, Oscar Wilde, of course. And see, this is an example of a book I didn't read in its entirety. I had read excerpts before, of course, and I read some more excerpts in preparation for the episode, but I listened to an entire reading performance. What was it, 6 hours or something? I listened and watched on YouTube. Um, can't remember the gentleman's name, but very moving. I mean, he was crying by the end of it, or at certain parts of it. I
Was that
don't
the
know if you
live
saw that
reading?
one.
I mean, was it
Yeah,
for an
I mean
audience?
there's more than one, but yeah, there was an audience, and it was like a 6 on. a 6-hour marathon reading, and this guy, he had to stop to drink water, he had to clear his throat, but he soldiered on, finished the whole thing, and at certain points he was like getting emotional, tearing up, bawling even. Uh,
I think
but
when we run out of content
yeah,
ideas for potting, we can just turn it. We can just start live streaming us reading
live
for
streaming,
hours.
reading a whole text. Hey man, you're giving me some ideas. Got to rack up those hours.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think it was different. It was different from reading it, just like it's different from watching a Shakespearean play performed and reading it on the page. But in that case, I don't think I got any less out of it than I would have had I read the entire thing on the page, but it was just different, let's
Why
say.
are you choosing
Now,
to do that?
what?
To go with the audio version? What advantage does it have?
Well, I did it in that case because it was too long. I couldn't read all of De Profundis before we recorded. We were doing an episode. I was reading something else, and I don't know. I didn't have time to sit down and read it all. So I just, like, in my spare time, I could just play the video on my phone and then pick up where I left off when I had more spare time.
But is that because you didn't have a text version?
Yeah, and that was another issue that I found, like, excerpts online, but like not the whole thing. And I wasn't able to. I didn't have time to finish reading it in its entirety on the page. I read, the passages that I scrounged online, but not the whole thing. But I
I get it.
listened to the whole thing.
I'm trying to understand exactly. Like I can guess, but I'm trying to understand exactly like how does that increase the pace? Is that because when you're reading physically, you might reread and that would slow you down, or because if
Yeah,
you,
and
yeah,
I think I'm a slow reader, and I stop, I annotate, I reread. Yes, and when you're listening, you can occasionally tune out and don't feel like you miss too much. It's kind of like skimming. You
but
know.
then how can you argue that it's as deep of an experience?
Well, because in that case, because like it was being performed, so like when there's a passage of great emotion and the reader voice actor is like breaking up, it rivets your attention.
Sure, but you were trying to say that it's exactly on par with.
No, I'm not saying that. I didn't say that. I said it's different. But
Listener, you
I
go back
don't.
and check what he said. All right, I'm gonna fact check that.
Okay.
Sorry,
What I
I'm just
said? It's
feeling
exactly the same. I think I said it's different.
okay. I think you said that it was no less. You didn't lose anything by doing that.
Oh, I'm getting a message here saying that your reception is not good. I'm hearing you, but I don't
The
know.
message is from Riverside or from one of
Uh,
our.
oh yeah, no, that's from someone in the chat. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I don't know. I can hear you, so
Hello.
we'll
I can
see.
see my mic up as well, so hopefully in one of the
Yeah,
uploads it'll be present.
yeah. When you talk into your earpiece, there, it's clearer. But
I'll hold the earpiece.
okay. All right. So yeah, Quixote. That was, you read that in its entirety. Um, long, long ago, I read, at least the first half. The Wasteland, that was your first introduction to the text. A Taste of Honey, that was, I think, for both of us, the first experience. And that too, I listened to the radio play and just read excerpts. So,
I was just gonna
uh,
say that
our, Yeah,
sorry, one final like way that we can read, which I find particularly enjoyable, is to listen and read at the same time. So it ensures that pacing that you need when you know you're pressed for time.
yeah.
But you're also able to to interact with the
I think
actual
I
word.
I think I did that with A Taste of Honey. I did have like
Yeah,
a written
that's how I did
text
Taste of Honey as well.
as I was listening, so that
And especially for a
I
play, I think that's useful.
yeah, and I won't say that I like read every word, but like it was nice to have the text, and if I misheard something, I could go back and look at it. So that's
In a
always
play
nice.
like
But
Taste of Honey,
anyway,
where you want to catch those accents, those Mancunian accents,
yes,
and the way that they pronounce certain slang words, yeah, I think it's really useful.
Mancunian.
Yes, sir.
Shout out to the northern peoples.
The
All right,
Liverpudlians in the
so
house.
yeah, yeah. At least we don't have any Devonians lurking in our chat at the moment. But you're welcome to. We love you all. We love the South as well as the North. Um, yeah, so we've covered these in much greater detail. I'll include links to those episodes if anyone's interested. Uh, so this, well, actually, you put these two together. We all know you took that trip to the dirty South, and we're talking about the eastern Georgia, not the state in the U.S., but rather the country over in your neck of the woods, Georgia, with this beautiful script. But you read a couple of books. What, you just picked them up at a bookshop, or they were at your guest house, or what?
Yeah, these were both featured. I find that when you go to different countries, there'll often be a section where they're hyping up their local authors, particularly those who have been translated or have written in the original English.
Mm-hmm.
And that's always like a way to enhance your travel experience, right? Is to read some local text to kind of
Absolutely.
avoid just having a blinkered vision of the country. So these were both very fast reads, so quite a modern prose, lots of dialogue, and both of them had the Georgian characters interacting in foreign settings. So that was nice too, because you had the juxtaposition of how a Georgian might experience something with how Americans would. Or, for example, in the Literature Express, the premise of the story is that there have been some kind of grants given for different fairly well-known writers from all across Europe to convene on a train that would make pit stops, and then this collection of writers would give readings and interviews. And of course, because they're all writers, they're all fairly eccentric, and you get lots of hilarity and soap operatic episodes throughout. I think you'd definitely enjoy that one.
So
Yeah, and
this is the
you see the
Literature Express
that's
by
the Literature
Vasha
Express.
Bugadze.
Yes, and in American fairy tales, Dato Turashvili is studying in the U.S. I can't remember which state, but he's also on some kind of grant to work there and study there with writers from all over. And yeah, I sent you one episode in which we assume it's a true recounting of a conversation that Dato has with Kurt Vonnegut, and yeah, both of these writers fall in love when on their travels, and generally doesn't work out, but that kind of keeps your attention as well, like the love story. And both have a dark sense of humor, maybe particularly in terms of Georgia's relationship to political independence, to Russia, maybe to its own struggled or fettered history. Yeah. Definitely recommend them. And I think both are alive today. Both are prominent public intellectuals.
Okay, so again, those of you listening, it's American Fairy Tales by Dato Turashvili and The Literature Express by Lasha Bugadze. Um, yeah, the anecdote that you shared, I was trying to find that today, but I couldn't in our chat. I don't know if you maybe you sent a voice message reading the passage or whatever, but it was Vonnegut talking to Mr. Turashvili, I guess, about Kerouac, right? And
That's
what did he
right.
say? What did he say? Like Kerouac,
I think he slagged him off, right?
yeah, he said something like, "Don't," but you realize Kerouac was just a horrible drunk, or something. Was it that? Something like that. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
something. He dissed him a bit, which it's interesting because we're Kerouac fans to some extent. Like, I was never that enthused by On the Road, but the Dharma Bums really, you turned me onto that, and I mean that I very much enjoyed that.
It may be also a
Uh,
comment on Kerouac's kind of growing conservatism as he gets older. I think it's well known that he lost a lot of that youthful idealism and
mm-hmm.
became a bit of a miser.
And a friend of William Buckley Jr., CIA asset. Um, yeah, everything connects to everything. We did an episode on the Dharma Bums in season 2, I want to say, so put that in the show notes as well. All right, let's move on. These are some American classics, I guess you could say. Um, Fahrenheit 451, Streetcar Named Desire, and I particularly wanted to ask you about your experience with Bukowski. You read his Ham on Rye. Now, was that your first Bukowski novel?
I had read another Bukowski earlier in the year, and I can't even remember which one right now, which is a testament
Post
to
Post Office, Women, Factotum, Pulp. There's one other. What am I
it may even have
forgetting?
been multiple of those, but
Okay.
I'm just checking
How did you find it, Ham on Rye?
physically, or how did I enjoy it?
No, well, yeah. How did you? Well, both.
No, I mean it seems to be in fairly large stock at the St. Petersburg bookstores. So, just for the record, I'm more comfortable talking about Fahrenheit and Streetcar, but yeah, I would say Bukowski's strength is readability, stimulating, comical. I guess Ham on Rye, and again, I didn't do much prep for this episode, but if I remember correctly, you get quite a bit about his childhood, which I think
Yeah,
is
that's right.
a nice antidote to a lot of the more sourly kind of grimy stuff that you get out of Bukowski. You empathize with him more when you see like how loveless his childhood was. Seems to me that he's done the best he could with his circumstances. I don't see him as like obviously as a spiritual role model. Um, there's a certain aspect of like cynicism and destruction. I think goes side by side with a Bukowski book. But that doesn't mean he's not brilliant or an amazing artist. And you?
Well, I look back at my notes because there was a year when I read all 6 Bukowski novels like consecutively. I was on a tear, like I couldn't stop. And in my notes, I keep all my notes about reading in this raggedy ass
Nice.
oversized notebook that I've had since Korea. But it was 2015, so that year I read all 6 Bukowski novels, and I remember this being my least favorite. And by the way, the other one I was trying to remember is Hollywood. I think that makes 6. So, I mean, I liked it, but it wasn't like my favorite. My favorite was actually Pulp, which is not one people generally talk about, but that was amazing. Of
That
course,
may have been the one that
Post
I
Office
read.
and
Does that
Women.
it starts out with a private detective?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah,
That's
okay, I
Pulp.
read that. Yeah.
And there's a character called Celine, which is,
Right,
a
yes, yes,
reference
yes,
to,
yes, yes. Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
reference to the
Of course,
French
and I
author
read
that,
Celine this year. I should have put that on my list. The
yeah,
Journey, that was
to
a
the end of
major
the
book for
night.
me.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was fantastic. These both of these were paired with me with Carlos. These Celine and Bukowski are two of his favorites.
Okay.
Particularly, he
Well,
was really
yeah,
into Celine.
those are, yeah, there's definitely a connection there. Um, well, okay. Well, what do you want to say about Fahrenheit 451 and Streetcar? I've got a Tennessee Williams story too, but go ahead.
Well,
You first.
Fahrenheit is obviously like a kind of like on the either on the middle school or the high school canon in a lot of American
Yeah.
universities, and in a way that's slightly off-putting, because he just has an element of like mainstream cringe to it. But
Yeah.
I wasn't sure if I had read it before, and I was reading it in preparation for teaching it, and yeah, I just found a lot of it so prescient and haunting to some aspects of my life today. For example, the narrator's wife, I remember she'd always be going to bed with her headphones in, listening to like a bunch of just kind of random shit. And like I'm in the habit of, after my wife and I have decided to say goodnight, um, and maybe the cuddling session is finished and I turn over, like I often will put in headphones, and I just feel like, oh, I'm just like that. Like or generally kind of watching the way that our phones affect our relationship, or the times that my wife and I clearly kind of would just rather be on our phones than necessarily engaging, and just my kind of need to constantly have something on, something playing. I just feel like Bradbury's definitely speaking to that. And then
Hmm.
he's got these huge screens, right? That
Yeah.
the society is obsessed with. First you get one wall screened, and then you get, the ultimate is to have all four of your walls like with huge screens, and just like that's incredible foresight. I mean, this is like, if we think about the Black Mirror as the screen, of course, not necessarily just the
Yep.
show, but it's like, yeah, he was right on with this stuff. And coming back to the start of this podcast, talking about the need to preserve reading, I mean, that book is all about that, right? So
Oh, yeah.
uh so it's yeah, it was powerful in many ways. It was very compelling in a lot of ways that made me uncomfortable with my own lifestyle. And probably that's a good thing, right? If something's making you question and speaking to your reality.
Well, like you, I'm not sure that I ever read it in its entirety. Of course, it's probably forced on me in school at some point, and I'm pretty sure I wouldn't have finished it just out of sheer a sheer act of rebellion. It's like, you insist I read this, I ain't reading it. Um, I have seen the French New Wave movie version. Is it Truffaut or Godard? Uh, but anyway, I saw that, and there's a new movie version too.
I think I heard
Um,
about it, but yeah.
yeah, I saw you know parts of it on HBO or whatever. But I should probably go back and read the whole thing.
Truffaut, by the way.
Um, it's Truffaut, yeah.
Hmm.
I should probably go back and read the whole thing at some point.
It's
But
very
tell
good,
me
and
about your,
we should give
yeah,
props to teachers who are, it's a rebellious text fundamentally. Like I get why you wouldn't want to read it, but it
Yeah.
is a text that is speaking to the underdog.
Well, it's like the canonization in the public school system and maybe private school system of 1984. It's like it's so interesting that this that the official world would be like recommending this text because it's like revealing all its secrets, you know?
But we should
It's
be
like
grateful for
what
that.
yeah, but why are they doing it? It makes you wonder, is this too a psyop, you know? It's like this is the world you're creating or trying to create or have created, you know? It's like it's so strange that you would be so open about it, so blatant. Brave New World, same thing. But anyway, tell me about your experience with Tennessee Williams. Was this your first play of
I
his?
think so, yeah. And very impressed, very grateful to be teaching a text like this to my students because of
Mm-hmm.
how mature it is and how many topics it approaches from like a rather progressive point of view. Um, Progressive in a positive, with all the positive connotations.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I would say, just coming back to the topic of reading again, like, I see as a teacher, I see how reading is dropping off. And I wonder if Cambridge, and here I don't mean the university, I mean the teaching program, institution that is Cambridge, which controls like a huge system of exams and so on, right? So like Cambridge have their IGCSEs, their A levels, and they're having to grapple with this new demographic of students who don't really read. And I think by choosing stuff like A Taste of Honey or A Streetcar Named Desire, they're really finding a way to still make reading exciting for kids, because I just see how my students are a lot more willing to engage with plays, which maybe minimize the longer descriptive passages and kind of give you more of that like visceral hit all the time. You've got a lot more just straight dialogue. These two plays that we're talking about, there's a lot of scandal. So in this way, it's like it's a way to save reading, right? It's to kind of you gotta make the type of texts that are being assigned hot enough for a modern audience. Yeah, I don't know what you think about that. I mean, again, that's sad in a way, but
Yeah, but
that's
it's
bums
I
on
mean
seats.
it's hot, but it's still great literature, I
Absolutely,
would argue. I
sure,
mean,
but it has a
um
certain immediacy that I'm just saying.
yeah.
Other texts, like even reading Lord of the Flies with my students, there's considerable amount of descriptive passages that I almost feel like I have to apologize for
Mhm. Oh,
because
right.
the students just are not patient enough.
Right. Right. ADHD and all that. Um yeah. Well, I mean, I was just going to say like I remember very clearly. I think this was my first experience with A Streetcar Named Desire, although it may have been Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, but I saw the film versions first.
Mhm.
I saw uh, the Paul Newman, Elizabeth Taylor, Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. I saw the Marlon Brando, Vivian Lee, Streetcar, and I became, for a brief period, a Tennessee Williams fanatic. And I went to the library and I checked out like his collected plays, and I read all of them, man. Like Sweet Bird of Youth, Night of the Iguana, and I watched the films. That was kind of like there was a period of time when I would like maybe it started around the time I watched Kubrick's what is it, Clockwork Orange, and then read the Anthony Burgess novel, and like I had this
Mhm.
idea that I was going to be. I was in. It was my first year of graduate school, and I had this idea of being like some hipster literary film guy, like I'm gonna compare and contrast. I'm gonna write a paper and go give a talk at a conference that'll blow their minds. When of course that's like the most obvious thing in the world, but youth is an excuse for everything. But anyway, I would watch the film version and then read the actual play, or read the play first, then watch the film version if one existed. And I think I ended up like reading all of Tennessee Williams, and I loved it. I thought he was,
So what do you think it was that?
still do think he's brilliant.
What do you think? What were the qualities of his plays that you found most compelling?
Glass Menagerie, that's another, of course. Just, well, he was greatly influenced by Lawrence, and I still am influenced by Lawrence, and that time I was just getting into Lawrence. And
By
so
the
just
way, sorry to interrupt you, but really quickly,
yeah,
Robert's made a couple requests for us to take on a Lawrence text this season, my buddy Robert. So
Robert
he's
in
suggested,
Italy,
yeah, so he's requested either, what is it, In Rainbows? No, that's the Radiohead. The
the
Rainbow?
rainbow, the
Okay.
rainbow.
The
Yeah,
Rainbow, or not Women in Love. What are the other?
Sons and Lovers.
Sons and Lovers. Yep.
Okay, that's probably more appropriate for Books Are Burning than texting, but I'm down for it if you are. That'll
I've
take
read them
more
all, but it would take a long
preparation
time
time.
to reread because it's been a few years.
Yeah, yeah. Um,
Sorry. So he was influenced
Lady
by
Lady
Lawrence.
Chatterley. What, maybe we could do a Lawrence. Actually, if he wants Lawrence, I got the perfect Lawrence text for texting, and I've been thinking about doing that actually since season one. So okay, we'll do it, but it's not going to be one of the novels if I'm choosing.
Okay.
But anyway, um, but it's about novels, so maybe everyone can get what they want. But yeah, just the frankness with which he dealt with, sexual matters. In the Hollywood version, it's like not really clear. You don't. It's like, wait, what's going on with Brick and whatever his male friend's name was? Like, what? It's not clear that like that guy was in love with him, and maybe there was a homoerotic relationship. But yeah, it's the maybe one of those hot components that you're talking about. Like it's a text that well, and Streetcar too, named Desire of all things, right? Like yeah, maybe it's the sexuality of it, but also the dialogue and the uh depiction often of southern um venues. Venues is not the right word, but southern
Climbs.
yeah, characters and milieus. um of course, with the Night of the Iguana and so on, you've got more exotic locations. But yeah, there was I remember there's like the mention in the play. You don't get this in the movie, but in the play, like one of the female characters talked about how she was out on a boat in a river with this Australian guy, and basically jerked off. Like, I don't know if he pulled a Louis C.K. and asked
That's
her to
right. I
watch,
was
or
about to say that.
I don't know if he
Louis
asked her to
C.K. will
watch, or he,
forever be synonymous with public
yeah,
jerking off now.
public masturbation. But yeah, I mean, that wasn't in the film. The film is really good though. It's with Richard Burton and is it Ava Gardner? But anyway, yeah, it's like, oh wow, you can write about that. He put that in this play. This guy's like an American master. They tell us he's great at school, and he's writing about real shit like this. So there was some of that. Uh, I think later he became a bit too like wrapped up in his drinking, mired in alcoholism and so on, but
He Kerouac himself.
he whacked himself. Uh, but uh, but there's a great body of work that he produced. All right, let's move to the main event. Oh no, we're
Mm.
not ready for that yet. We got a few more stragglers here that I wanted to ask you about. Desire by Murakami. Everyone loves Murakami, don't they? Wild Sheep Chase. Um, I know you read Kafka on the Shore,
And I read
as
IQ84, which I think is his longest
did I.
book, and I
And
loved
how
it.
was that? Oh,
Fantastic.
really?
Yeah.
Okay, I still need to read that. I bought it and then I gave it to someone, and so I didn't read it. But okay, that's good to know. But Desire, you were less impressed with, apparently.
I don't even remember it here, really. So there you go. That's
Yeah, so
my
that
deep
that says
analysis.
something. Okay. Well, so we'll put that on the do not recommend list. What about Frankenstein in Baghdad? I was just watching a George Galloway video titled Frankenstein in New Orleans or something like that. Is it similar, or are we talking about like a jihadist that was trained by the CIA or something?
I think it's well written. It's interesting premise. So you've got like first of all, I love the story Frankenstein, and I've taught it
Yes.
in different incarnations for the last few years. Um, so I think that
Shout
was one
out to
of the
Mary
appeals.
Shelley.
Absolutely. Um, and in this text, you get a nice tragic view of Iraq post US, and that's kind of what I was looking for. And so you just see what a disastrous urban wasteland it is now.
Oh, so we weren't greeted as liberators?
So I don't remember the minutia
But
of the
don't worry,
plot, but
we're getting it right now in Syria, so don't worry.
yeah.
You know,
But
Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria.
yeah,
Yeah,
I'm
we
not
figured
sure
it out.
that it kept my attention that well throughout, but I think that the premise was interesting of this kind of person that was kind of created out of the rubble of Baghdad and then became invincible and went on these different kind of bizarre missions. But again, this is gonna reveal my passive reading, so let's move on and just say that I'd give it two and a
But
half stars.
is it 2.5 stars? Okay, that's what I was looking for.
Better
So that's
premise than
Frankenstein.
actual experience.
Yes. Well, it's like when I read Garcia Marquez' Memories of My Melancholy Horrors, and the best thing about it was the title. Like the title was fantastic and the reading experience was terrible, very disappointing. But we're talking about here Frankenstein in Baghdad by Ahmed Sadawi, 2.5 stars. How about the Flaubert or Flaubert, A Simple Heart? Not a work I'm familiar with.
I think what all I'm gonna say is that I like these kind of cute small editions of books that you sometimes find at bookstores, that they'll be like near the
Yeah,
cashier. And
yeah.
so I think both Desire and the Flaubert are very portable. Um,
Mm-hmm. Vintage
uh,
Minis, says the Desire, the Murakami book. Vintage Minis.
yeah, so this is a book about the working life of Félicité, a maid employed by Madame Aubin. I'm definitely not reading this right now, by the way. A not so easy to get along with widow, and she's kind of living a very humble and depressing existence. And then one day she receives a parrot from a guest, and then this parrot kind of becomes her raison d'etre. And after it dies, she gets it stuffed and like worships it. and I think again a nice premise. I wouldn't necessarily say you're gonna miss out too much by not reading it, but let's move past the texts Tom feels insecure about discussing at length.
Isn't there a book called Flaubert's Parrot? Like when you mentioned
Possibly.
the parrot, yeah, I think there's. I don't know anything about it, but I heard that title, so
Yeah,
that's
there
probably
is.
the
It's a
origin.
novel by Julian Barnes that was shortlisted for
Julian
the
Barnes,
Booker
right?
Prize in
So it
1984.
has to be. It has to be referring to this, right?
Hmm.
Interesting. All right. Um, yeah, let's get to the main event, and it is this anthology of Alice Munro stories that you read. Um, Alice Munro, the Canadian Chekhov, um,
Yeah, I came across that
2013,
today.
yeah, 2013 Nobel laureate,
Yep.
2013, I want to say. So this edition included the stories The Moons of Jupiter, The Progress of Love, Differently, Carried Away, Hate Ship, Friendship, Courtship, Love Ship, Marriage, and Inside of the Lake, as well as the Nobel Prize presentation speech. So you can
Not by her
just.
though,
So, oh, no?
I
Okay.
thought it was going to be
Oh,
like
no?
it's it's the it's by
Oh, the
Professor Peter
committees.
England. Yes, I was hoping it'd be
Yeah.
her speech because that tends. I think the writer's own speeches tend to have more flair and like more profundity. But
Yeah. Well,
whatever.
that's probably on the Nobel website. We can link
Okay.
to that. Show notes Monroe's Nobel acceptance speech, if she gave one. And we did a Nobel acceptance speech once on texting, didn't we? Do you remember that?
I do, and
Harold Pinter, we've covered all ground. We're very thorough, like good Enneagram fives. All right. Let's see. Let's see. So yeah, talk about as many or as few of these as you want. Just whatever you want to share. Impressions. Your favorite one. Um. Oh, before we do that though, I'm sure you saw this. You know about this.
a little bit,
The
but I'd love for you to give me a refresher.
Okay. This is kind of a downer to read before we like examine her actual work, but hey, we live in the age of cancellation. We already canceled Gauguin. Well, I don't know if we canceled him, but we addressed the controversy, right? So got to do it here with Ms. Monroe. Says on 7 July 2024. Remember, Monroe died last year. I want to say in May. So on 7 July 2024, shortly after Monroe's death, her youngest daughter, Andrea Skinner, revealed in an essay in the Toronto Star that her stepfather, Gerald Fremlin, had sexually abused her starting in 1976 when she was 9 years old and ending when she became a teenager. She says she told Monroe about the abuse in 1992. After learning of the abuse, Monroe separated from Fremlin for a few months, but ultimately went back to him. According to Skinner, Monroe said that she had been told too late, loved her husband too much, and wanted to stay with him. In 2005, Fremlin pleaded guilty to sexual assault and received a suspended sentence and probation. Monroe's biographer, Robert Thacker, was aware of the allegations, and Skinner reached out to him before his biography was published, but he chose not to include them in the book, deeming them a private family matter. Ooh, controversy. Pretty dark. Uh, I don't know. Any reaction to that? Uh, Remember, we talked about Philip Roth's comment that literature is not a moral beauty
Yeah,
pageant.
I mean
Art is not a moral beauty pageant.
that's the
Yeah.
only response I can really give.
Hmm.
Yeah, I we're considering
Well,
her
yeah.
as a writer, not as a noble human to try and
Yeah.
follow.
Yeah. I mean, hey, I've got a copy of the Marquis de Sade's Juliet on my shelf, so who
I
am
mean, if
I
we're just
to
speaking
judge
about
others?
that, of course it's depressing.
Yeah, it's not, you know, as I say, it's a downer before we start talking about her literature, but got to take the bad with the good, I guess. All right, so anything you want to say about the Moons of Jupiter? This is like the title track of an album. It's the Moons of Jupiter from the collection called the Moons of Jupiter. And, those who know Munro, I mean, did she ever write a novel? I'm not sure that she did, but she's
And just for the
certainly
record, I
best
think
known for her short stories.
I wanted before because I wanted to tell you a quick intro as to how I got this book
Yeah.
and my connection with Monroe so far. And I think that perhaps I think you're much better versed in her work. So that's because this is my first encounter. So I just want to say I was in a bookstore in Tbilisi looking for a bargain book. You can see the price there, sticker's still there. So it was 18, and I forgot the name of the Georgian currency, but yeah, 18 of
Yeah.
those, which I think is
18 of those.
about $5. Maybe it was pretty cheap.
All
And
right.
yeah, it's not exactly what I would consider like a sexy book to read, like in terms of old white lady, kind of looks like cover of Good Housekeeping or something.
Yeah.
And yeah, not something
But
I would.
but but look what was going on in her house.
Well, that and I do feel a certain regret sometimes. You may not think it's significant to care that much about diversity in one's reading, but at the same time, I think you probably do strive for that to some extent. And it's not to fulfill some quota or something, but I do notice, like for example, when I made my list, I do notice the lack of female voices, or and it's not that I want to read a diversity of voices so that I can say I've read diversity of voices, but it's just so that I can get a more rounded picture of the human experience, right? So
Of course.
yeah,
Yeah, it's
so
it's Bakhtein's heteroglossia, you want all these different voices speaking. The
yeah,
dialogic imagination that he found in Dostoevsky.
so I was happy to get a different voice, and that kind of made me stubbornly buy this, even if it didn't and the 18 price. But uh, yeah, so my mom knew her. I think you know her, but I didn't know her, and the only disadvantage to this particular series is that because it's like a more disparate anthology than meaning I've heard that what she tends to produce are what's called a short story cycles. I'm not sure if you're
Mm-hmm.
familiar with this term, but the definition I found is it's a collection of short stories in which the narratives are specifically composed and arranged with the goal of creating an enhanced or different experience when reading the group as a whole as opposed to its individual parts.
Of course. It's
Yeah.
like what I'm
Is it
saying,
like
if you
Earnest
think of
Games,
it
Mark Will? Genuine
exactly.
question. No, that's a genuine question, by the way. I'm not just
It
taking a
it
piss.
it absolutely is. I was not going to say that because, we can only have so much self-promotion, but absolutely it's conceived like each piece can be read on its own, but when you read the entire collection, it's a different experience. And this is also, you know, true of like uh certain albums, concept albums. Like I said, you can think of the Moons of Jupiter, the story, as like the title track of the album or the book, the short story cycle collection, The Moons of Jupiter. You know what I mean?
Right,
So
but you can't
yeah,
really do
you
that
can.
with this book. That's my point, right? Because this is more like a greatest
Yeah,
hits.
yes, there you go. It's a greatest hits compilation, but that's fine. Because after you read this sampler, you might want to go back and read, each short story collection or cycle rather. So yeah, fair point. So how
But my
about the
question
moons
for
of
you as
Jupiter?
well, before I
Oh
jump into
yeah.
this, is: are you familiar with any of the stories from this collection?
Um, let's go story by story. I'll just tell you now what I've got on my shelf. Um, well, let me tell you about my whole Alice Munro experience. I look
Okay.
back at my notes. Here's the notebook. 2013, I read Dear Life. That's a collection, and I don't think there's a story from Dear Life in this
Mm,
anthology.
no.
I
Oh yeah,
read
there is Inside of the Lake,
there is. Uh,
which is the last
okay,
one.
okay. So yes, I know I read that in 2013. I cannot find it. I don't know where it is. So I wasn't able to look back at that. Um, in 2014, I read one of her nonfiction books, and I've lost the cover. Look at that; it's just completely gone. But there's the
Nice.
old white lady on the back. This is called The View from Castle Rock, and this is it may be the I've read three of her books, but this may be my favorite. It's nonfiction, and it's about the her uh Scotch Irish roots, right? Like she's descended from these Scotch Irish uh people who immigrated to Canada, you know? And so she goes back to it's called The View from Castle Rock. She goes to this place in Scotland called Castle Rock and like traces her ancestry. So it's kind of a genealogical exploration or investigation, but you know, with like a novelist or I should say a short storyteller's sense of
Sensibility.
detail and
Mm.
narrative and yeah, so that I really like that. I can't tell you why. It just maybe because I've got like Scotch Irish heritage too, and so that kind of felt personal to me in a way. And then at some point, I can't find it in my notes, but I know I read it because here it is, Open Secrets. And the first story in Open Secrets is Carried Away, which
That's the
is
one I
in
want to
your
talk about
collection.
today. That's the one I want to
Okay,
talk about.
good.
Yeah.
Now I just flipped through the pages. I think I might remember the story that you want to focus on, but let's see. But do you want to just skip over these others? I mean, we can just like
Yeah, let's skip over the
mention
others.
them. So, oh,
You
can
can
I ask about
appreciate
the?
the AI art if you want.
That's what I was going to ask. They're AI generated, right?
Yeah.
What did you say? Like you this is like some kind of wood sculpture motif you've got going. What is that?
Yeah, so let me just I'm trying to remember which website I used. I used Adobe.
Magic Studio?
So this is Adobe, which I prefer.
Mm-hmm.
And they give you all these prompts. I'm just opening it up right now so I can just like explain what I did. So you described the image you want to generate, and for each one I just used the title itself, and I like didn't allow myself to do anything except for the title.
Yeah.
Um, and then you get a huge number of options. I think because I don't have my VPN on right now. Anyway, so I chose as like my four preferences. I had like graffiti, uh, cubism, wood something, and then another, and then I don't know if it was combining those effects or giving me one of each, but yeah, it gives
Yeah.
you four per search, and then
Prompt.
you
Yeah.
can, yeah.
That they I really like this style. Wood, I guess you would call it wood mosaic or something. Interesting. Yeah.
I read somewhere that like readers prefer AI poetry to. Did you see that article?
No, but I wouldn't be surprised. That's
But I will
yeah,
say
that's
also, which is very strange, like I was asking ChatGPT to summarize some of these stories for me today to just refresh my memory, and they
yeah.
would make it made very obvious mistakes, like inserting character names that just didn't exist.
Yeah.
Um, and so that's a little bit alarming, like why it continues to make very basic mistakes like that.
Well,
But
I'm not
anyway,
surprised. That's a feature, not a bug. Remember, Henry Kissinger and Eric Schmidt wrote a book, which, according to Whitney Webb, I haven't read it, but they one of the goals is to get people to doubt their own sanity and powers of reason and logic, and so if the AI says it, you can accept some stupid idea because you don't trust yourself. So maybe that's one of
well,
the
hopefully those
purposes.
errors will remain, for the sake of me as a teacher, so that when students are, introducing names that are not even in the text, I can be like, well,
Yeah, right.
so, yeah.
No substitute for the real thing, at least not now. All right, so yeah, we do like the artwork, but the moons of Jupiter, nothing to say about that. Next on the list is the
I don't
title
want to say
track
it's
from
nothing to
the
say about that. It's,
yeah,
but
okay.
it's we
We'll
don't have
just
time
not
to do a
focus on it.
detailed. Yeah,
Yeah. The Progress of Love title track. What's next? Differently from Friend of My Youth. That's an interesting image there. Um, oops. Carried Away from Open Secrets. Okay, so that's what we're going to focus on. I've got it here. Tell me about Carried Away.
sure.
Let's
It's by
see if.
far the longest story in the collection.
Mm-hmm.
Comes through at a nice 47 pages, and the protagonist's name is Louisa.
Mm-hmm.
Does that ring a bell? She's a librarian.
I, I saw that. Yeah, just flipping through today.
Okay.
Yep.
And it's divided into 4 sections. So section 1 is called Letters, section 2 Spanish Flu, section 3 Accidents, and section 4 Tall Puddle Martyrs.
I saw those headings. Yes.
Okay. So
Spanish flu. That's very, you know, coronavirusy.
yeah, and made me think of that because at one point she insists on keeping the library open despite all recommendations not to. And
There you go. That's
but
right.
initially what seems like an act of valor turns out to be just a mechanism for her to arrange a meeting between her and myself, Jack Agnew, who never shows up.
Okay.
So Jack Agnew, I am a soldier serving in World War One, and I have developed a crush on Louisa, although I don't even know her name. So I just refer my letters to someone called the librarian, but these letters do get to her. And we begin a correspondence, which becomes increasingly romantic to the point where I declare my love for Louisa. She sends me a picture, and I claim that I'm able to.
Just a headshot.
I think so. Yeah, it wasn't.
No nipple.
Unfortunately, no. Although maybe she managed to squeeze that in. No pun intended.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah. So this correspondence begins, which I excuse by saying, "Oh, there's a good chance I'm going to die anyway, so I can say whatever I want," kind of thing, without social fears. And I come from the same town as the library where Louisa works.
I like how you're
And
committing to the role.
yeah,
Keep
yeah.
keep going. That's great.
So Louisa is anxiously checking the papers to see if I've died or not. And seems like I haven't. And then it seems like I've returned. So if I've returned, where am I? And
Mm-hmm.
Louisa doesn't know what I look like. So all she does is just kind of maintains vigilance at the library, hoping to find me there, and for good reason. But tragically for her, one day she reads in the local newspaper that I've recently married, and that's the first that she hears. Then sometime later, she receives a little note, ostensibly from me, which says
Mm-hmm.
very briefly something like, "Sorry, I was already engaged before I left for war." So
Mm.
you feel for Louisa, and yeah, that would be that's the first section. Um, we get various narrative jumps, and Louisa is any of this ringing a bell? By the way,
Yes.
okay.
Yeah.
Louisa lives at this hotel throughout called the Continental. It seems like throughout anyway. She encounters different people there, um, and you kind of get some subtle comment on social attitudes towards gender at the time. You've got very early on, you've got this dentist who had shown an interest in her, but had told her he had never before seen a woman touch wine or spirits. So,
Yes. I
in a
saw
way,
that
she's
today.
yes, in a way, she's seen as this kind of more experienced woman with a potentially colored reputation, or but at the same time, then we see this romantic one night stand scene with this guy named Jim Frary, who's a traveling salesman, and he hears her story. She's been drinking whiskey. She tells him the whole story of Jack Agnew. I'm ditching my pseudonym apparently,
Mm-hmm.
and then he takes her upstairs, and then there's blood on the bed, and he seems like he's shocked, like he didn't realize. So it's implied that she's a virgin, which
Right.
is which goes against this aura that she had of the older experienced woman, the more worldly woman.
Right.
um uh I don't know if you want me to just keep doing synopsis. I don't know how useful that is. I mean, I'll give you a couple more basics just to close out the synopsis. So
Mm-hmm.
I did mention that I was decapitated, and Louisa finds out about that, I think, also in the paper. So Jack works at the main source of income for the community, which is a piano factory. And he's decapitated by the machines. And the owner of the factory, a guy named Arthur Dowd, ends up coming into the library shortly afterwards. And he's a widow at this point, and he gets into conversation with Louisa. He starts attending the library frequently. She kind of pushes him a little bit about my death, and implicit there is like some social criticism of kind of his lack of awareness about the safety concerns of the workers. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
all he
Right.
does is go and pay for the gravestone, and that's like seen as some on his part as some
Yeah.
great act of valor. But really, it's like now there's a widow and kids who have no means to take care of
Right.
themselves. But he soon after proposes to her, and they marry, and his business is in a state of decline for the rest of the story. But yeah, there's a thinly veiled criticism of capitalism. He explains once to Louisa that he has to drive this super fancy car just to kind of fulfill the reputation that he has in
People's
the
expectations.
yes,
Yeah.
exactly. So yeah, and then there's this kind of bizarre final scene where she's alone, she's maintaining the factory. Arthur's died. She goes to a neighboring village, I believe called London, and to check on her heart, and she bumps into Jack, who in reality has died. But now,
Yes.
yeah, you don't know if this is supposed to be like the ghost of Jack or if it's another person just with the same name. But they end up having this conversation where Jack tells her about his life now, talks about his wife and his kids, but his retelling like clearly goes against the reality that Louisa knows. So she decides not to contradict him. But either way, they have this exchange, and then we get one final short scene where Louisa is just arriving in the town of Carstairs
Hold
and
on.
is
Does
taking the
she
job
not?
as librarian.
Hold on. Does she not unceremoniously cut their conversation short and walk away?
You have the text in front of you or no?
I do, yeah.
Okay.
But our page
Um,
numbers will be different.
sure. We can still see.
I think I'm confusing this with another story. But as you're like summarizing it, I think you're doing a good job of evoking that whole setting, time, both time and place, which is something she does very well, right? Like
Mm,
you really feel like you're in early 20th century, somewhat rural but somewhat suburban Canada, you know? So she has a very strong sense of place and time,
yeah, and
which
I saw her.
it's a it's it's a beautiful thing, you know. It's like I really feel like I'm in that kind of provincial world, you know.
Yeah, and I saw her in an interview after she'd won the Nobel, and the interviewer was kind of asking kind of a silly question, in my opinion, just like, "Oh, does this rural setting?" And I think, what is the setting exactly? I can't remember it. I wrote it down. It's quite. I know it's just outside of Toronto. It says something with an H, Hudson or Huron. Let's see if I can find that here.
Huron, like Lake
Yeah,
Huron
that's
near
right.
there.
Yeah, so um, Huron County. Yeah, the interviewer was like, "Oh, does this really provide you with enough substance for your stories?" And she said, "Well, of course. Like here we've got just as much drama, and the human experience is fertile ground,
Yeah,
regardless."
yeah.
And that's certainly true.
I have a Canadian friend from that same general area. He's also a writer and musician, but he says, she nails it. Like her descriptions of the people and the landscapes and the life in these little villages and towns, um it's just dead on.
Mm.
So that's, and I can believe it, like I really feel like I'm transported to that world.
Have you been to Canada?
Yes, I've been to Montreal, but that's not the same thing, and probably, it's a lot of it has changed since the time that she's writing about, or like
Yeah,
most
because
of what she writes about.
I've never been there, and I kind of feel like it's slightly mysterious. I mean, it's like
Hmm.
on the one hand, we're tempted to just see it as an extension of the U.S., but it's obviously its own thing. And
Yeah,
yeah, so she's capturing like a unique Kairos.
yeah, and I was just gonna say this is like one of the, for all its faults and corruption, the Nobel Prize in Literature does introduce us to writers maybe we would not have read otherwise, and she's probably in that category. Um, I know she had a reputation and she was known and beloved by some, especially like so-called feminist writers, but until she won the prize, I didn't seek her out. So, and that's happened with other authors too, like Oe Kenzaburo, the Japanese writer. I read several of his books, and I wouldn't have otherwise, if he hadn't won the prize. Elfriede Jelinek is another. um, gal from China. Like that prize, for all of its corruption, does introduce us to like writers which would otherwise be obscure and maybe unknown.
Yeah, I'd like to even suggest that you and I possibly tackle a book called Flights by the Polish author Olga Tokarczuk. And I believe she won the Nobel Prize. Or am I tripping? She may not have won, actually, but she's definitely won. She won the Booker, but no, she did
Mm-hmm.
win the Nobel Prize. I'm sorry. I'm just
Recently,
not
right?
sure.
I think I heard of her.
Yeah, Olga
Yeah,
Nobel Prize Literature.
yeah, I'd be down for that.
2019, I guess she won. It says was awarded the 2018 Nobel Prize for Literature in 2019. Okay, yeah,
Yeah, that was because of they were having a controversy at the time,
okay.
sex scandal, and money or financial misbehavior, irregularity.
Something that I think you would enjoy if you revisited the story, if you don't remember, is there is a considerable amount of intertextuality. So
Mm-hmm.
that takes place in, first of all, Jack. He continues to visit this library weekly, kind of without her seeming to notice, and he doesn't even check out books officially from that point on. He just kind of takes
Mm-hmm.
them and returns them, but the books that he's reading are quite noteworthy and are indicative of his state of mind, and also another thinly veiled criticism of capitalism. So he's reading Bertrand Russell's The Practice and Theory of Bolshevism.
Hmm.
And then he ends up getting offed, by the factory. So I think there's a lot
Yeah.
being said there. And then G.K. Chesterton's What's Wrong with the World. Um, we also know that Louisa's a big fan of Thomas Hardy, and that the way that she describes Hardy, I would say, is also
She's
just
she's
also
probably
accurate.
speaking for Munro, right?
Exactly, and she says that
Yeah.
I had a great deal of time to read when she was in the hospital. My favorite authors are Thomas Hardy, who is accused of being gloomy, but I think is very true to life, and Willa Cather. I'm not familiar with Willa
Willa
Cather, but
Cather. Yeah, yeah,
Cather,
yeah.
okay, but I guess she wrote
Yeah.
some pioneer books. But yeah,
Yeah.
so this idea of gloomy but being very true to life. I'm not sure how gloomy Monroe's texts are, but there's definitely a sense of like stark realism and
Mm-hmm.
aversion to sentiment.
Well, there's that kind of Hardy-esque melancholia transported to the new world, I guess you could say.
Hmm, nicely put.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm feeling like nostalgic just hearing you revisit this makes me want to dip back into Open Secrets, but I really wish I could find Dear Life because I think I remember enjoying that more, but I don't know what happened to it.
And I think this
Sometimes books just
podcast is a
disappear.
testament to how much richer texts are when discussed afterwards, because
Mm-hmm.
something like this, it's very easy for me, the passive reader, to read and just kind of put down and it's just stimulation for the moment. But then that when you're responsible to another person, so it becomes much more enjoyable and more real. And you
So
get
did
kind
I
of
win you over? Are you glad you did the pod after
I
all?
am glad. Yeah, yeah. I just
That's
often feel like
great.
I'm not doing service to the mission as I'd like to, but it's okay.
No, not at all, man.
Imperfect is our
It's
paradise.
been
Hashtag
great.
Wallace Stevens.
Okay, show notes. All
Co-reality.
right. Uh was that mentioned in a
That's one of
co-reality?
the imperfect is our paradise. Wasn't that one of your choices for opening
May have
quote,
been.
or it may have been mine, but yeah.
All right, so next we have hate ship, friendship, courtship, love ship, marriage. What a
You're
great
frozen for me
title.
now.
Another title track that's from the collection. Um we'll just pass over that unless you want to say something.
Hey,
Inside
okay.
of the Lake
Mm-hmm.
from Dear Life?
I liked Hate Ship, Friendship, Courtship, Love Ship, Marriage
Anything to say
more
about
so
that?
than Inside of
I
the
think
Lake.
you might be frozen.
You were just
You
frozen for
there?
me a moment ago. I am here.
You're breaking up. Are
Check
you
one,
back
check
on
one.
hate ship, friendship, courtship, love ship,
Just
marriage?
to say, I would say this was another story that was very impressive.
Okay.
Yeah,
So check that one out, people.
yeah,
Inside of the
yeah.
Lake from Dear Life, the book that the collection that seems to have disappeared from my library.
Yeah, not as impressive.
Okay, not as impressive. So I mean the focus was um carried away from Open Secrets.
Mm-hmm.
So check that one out, people, and let us know in the comments here or on Substack what you think of Alice Munro and any of the other texts we discussed.
Absolutely.
Um, yeah, we're nearing the end of the broadcast. I'm Mark Will. You can find me on Substack at Mark Will Write, WRITE.substack.com. Tomek is also on Substack. That's tomekb.substack.com. And this is on YouTube streaming now, and we'll have an edited version up soon. That's YouTube at Mark Will Write, WRITE. Um, I guess next time I'll see you, we'll be doing an episode of texting, but more on that later. Um, you're welcome to come back to Books Are Burning anytime. You got a longer text that's not really, a texting kind of text. We can read it and discuss it here if you like.
Great.
Book reviews,
Be
that's one of the things we do up in this bitch.
be a pleasure.
All right. Thanks for joining me, Jack Agnew, aka Tomek. I'm Mark Will. This has been Books Are Burning. See you next time.